She thought it was just a rusted shipping container, forgotten behind a salvage yard, and sold off for cheap. But when 24-year-old mechanic Riley Ford pried it open, what she found wasn't scrap metal. It was a sealed time capsule from a war no one wanted to remember. The contents inside weren't just mysterious. They were dangerous, personal, and held a story someone had tried to bury forever. What started as a curious impulse buy quickly became a life-altering journey into secrets, sacrifice, and second chances. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if tales like this grab your heart and don't let go, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's chapter takes this mystery even deeper. The salvage yard on Route 17 didn't look like much. Just rows of twisted metal, busted appliances, and dented cars baking under the Carolina Sunday. But to Riley Ford, it was a treasure map, and every rusted line pointed to a story waiting to be uncovered. She stood in scuffed boots, arms crossed over a grease-streaked hoodie, squinting at the battered shipping pod sitting crooked on a flatbed trailer. 10 feet long, dented to hell, and streaked with rust like it had cried itself to sleep for decades. A faded, stenciled number stretched across the side. GEN 4811. No logos, no history. Just mystery. "You really want that piece of junk?" the yard's auctioneer asked, tipping his cap back. "No keys, no records, and it's welded shut." "That's the fun part," Riley replied, flashing the kind of half-smile that meant she already made up her mind. She had a thing for the forgotten. Cars that no one wanted, machines too far gone, things people had written off. Maybe because she knew what that felt like. Bidding started low. Most folks didn't even raise a hand. One old man tried to outbid her at $180, but backed off with a shrug and muttered, "Ain't worth the rust." Riley landed it for $230 less than she paid for a used compressor last month. She signed the receipt, loaded the pod onto her flatbed with a winch that squealed like a dying mule, and drove it home with the sun dropping low behind her. By the time she backed into the lot behind her garage, the cicadas were screaming in the trees, and sweat had soaked through her shirt. She parked under the floodlight, got out, and just stared at the thing. It didn't feel like the other hauls she'd rescued. It felt heavier, not just in weight, but in silence. Like it had been waiting to be opened for a long, long time. Her garage, Ford and Fix Garage, was a single-bay shop with tools older than she was, and shelves lined with spare parts, most of them labeled in Sharpie. She flicked on the overhead lights, grabbed a grinder, and went to work on the weld seam running across the container's main doors. Sparks danced in the air as steel met steel. It was thick. Too thick for a regular shipping crate. Military grade, maybe? Reinforced. Someone really didn't want this opened. She paused once, halfway through, rubbing her wrist and staring at the glimmering cut. What the hell were they hiding? Another hour passed. Metal groaned. The last weld popped. Riley dropped her grinder, pulled on gloves, and took a breath. The door creaked open an inch. Cold air kissed her cheek, the kind of cold that didn't belong on a summer night. She hesitated. Something primal stirred in her gut. Not fear, exactly. Just the sense that, once she opened it fully, there was no turning back. She pulled the door wide, and everything changed. The smell hit her first. Not rot, not rust, but sterile cold, like hospital air sealed in metal. Riley stepped back instinctively, unsure if it was refrigerant, mold, or something else entirely. She flicked on her flashlight and peered inside. The interior of the storage pod looked nothing like what she expected. It wasn't just a hollow crate. It had walls, flooring, and even insulation panels wrapped in thermal foil. Someone had built a room inside the pod. Not makeshift, not sloppy, deliberate. Professional. She stepped onto the metal threshold and felt the temperature drop another few degrees. The air was still. Suspended, as if nothing inside had moved for years. A large red tarp dominated the far end, stretched over something bulky and bolted down. Beside it, crates. stenciled letters on faded black cases. No markings she recognized, just strings of serial numbers and faint barcodes. Her boots echoed softly as she stepped fully inside. The walls had been riveted with steel plates. The door, now resting open behind her, was more vault than container hatch. Riley crouched near one of the crates and ran her fingers over the surface. The latch clicked open, stiff and reluctant. Inside, tools, but not the kind you bought at a hardware store. These were specialized, intricate, and clearly custom-built. Wrenches with dual-threaded heads. A diagnostic device, the size of a VHS tape, blinking dimly despite its age. She lifted one carefully. It felt too light for its size, almost like it was made with aerospace alloys. "What the hell is this place?" she whispered. Then she sawed a metal box, tucked behind a set of tool crates, small and matte gray. Something about it made her stop. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a lunchbox. But across the top, laser-etched in clear capital letters, was a name. Ford. R. She froze. Same last name. Same first initial. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. The box was locked with a digital keypad. A low battery light flickered red in the corner. She didn't have the code. But something deeper than logic told her this wasn't coincidence. This was connected to her. Somehow, a heavy thump sounded behind her. Riley spun around, heart hammering. The tarp. Something beneath it had shifted, or had she imagined it? She stepped closer and peeled it back slowly, expecting, she didn't know what. Beneath the red tarp was a machine. Part engine, part generator, part something else. Tubes, wires, stabilizers. It looked like a prototype, something out of a classified lab. And on the panel nearest her hand, etched in the same style as the box, were 3 words. Genesis Series 1. She stepped back. A breeze, impossibly cold, drifted out from the rear vent. Riley didn't understand what she had just uncovered. But one thing was clear. This wasn't junk. This wasn't forgotten. This was deliberately hidden, and she just cracked it open. By morning, Riley hadn't slept a minute. The garage lights still glowed over the open pod, throwing long shadows across the floor. Her coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the air, like a ghost reluctant to fade. She'd spent hours just staring at the thing under the tarp, tracing every bolt, label, and wire. It wasn't any engine she'd ever seen. Not automotive, not aircraft, not marine. It looked experimental, and it had been buried in steel. She pulled her phone from her pocket and snapped a few pictures, not to post, but for reference. Each image came out oddly dim, like the metal absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Genesis Series 1, she murmured again, reading the engraving. The name gave her nothing. It sounded biblical and industrial at the same time, like someone had tried to build their own beginning. Behind the machine, she found another section of the pod. A narrow, sealed door with a wheel lock, submarine style. She hesitated, then grabbed her wrench and began loosening the bolts. The door moaned, reluctant to give. When it finally did, stale air puffed into her face. Cold again. Unnaturally cold. She flicked on her flashlight. The second chamber was smaller, maybe 6 feet deep, lined wall to wall with metal shelving. Containers, folders, glass cylinders capped with frost. And in the corner a small wooden crate wrapped in weatherproof plastic, the only organic thing in sight. She stepped closer, kneeling. A yellowed tag dangled from the handle, the ink blurred but legible enough to read 3 faded words. Property of A. Ford. Her stomach dropped. That was her grandfather's name, Arthur Ford. He died when she was a kid. She'd grown up on stories of his service in the Air Force, his classified missions, his silence about the years that came after. Cold War stuff. Her dad used to shrug. Best not to ask. Now here she was, kneeling in front of something he'd clearly touched, maybe even hidden. She unwrapped the crate, careful not to tear the old plastic. Inside were documents bound with a canvas strap and a Polaroid photo tucked at the top. The image was faint, colors washed out. It showed 3 men in flight suits standing in front of a hangar. The man in the middle, her grandfather, younger, sharper, but unmistakable. He was smiling. In his hands, the same machine now sitting in her garage, still gleaming and new. Behind them, a sign barely visible. Project Genesis Facility Restricted Access. Riley sat back on her heels, her pulse roaring in her ears. Her grandfather hadn't just known about this. He'd worked on it. She turned the photo over. A single line was scrawled on the back in his handwriting. If you're reading this, then it wasn't destroyed. The pod's walls seemed to hum faintly, as if responding. Riley swallowed hard and looked back toward the garage entrance. For the first time since she'd opened it, she felt like someone or something was watching, and she realized this was no longer just about curiosity. It was about family, and a secret buried too deep to stay that way. The crate sat open beside her, the scent of old paper and machine oil thick in the air. Riley pulled out the first binder carefully, afraid the brittle canvas strap would crumble in her hands. The pages inside were stiff and yellowed, the corners curling, some stained with fingerprints that looked like they'd been pressed decades ago. She flipped to the first page, handwritten notes in a tight, angular script. Her grandfather's. The title at the top, Genesis Series 1. Core Stabilizer Protocol. She scanned the words, trying to make sense of the equations and sketches, power routing diagrams, pressure thresholds, fluid temperature variants. It was far beyond a car engine. It wasn't even military standard. It felt otherworldly, as if someone had tried to harness something just outside of what 1,970 seconds technology should have allowed. In the margins were underlined words that made her skin prickle. Containment, recoil dampening, thermal compression, non-combustible ignition sequencing. She didn't know what kind of machine needed these systems, but whatever it wasn't meant to run on gasoline and gears. She turned to the next page. More drawings, this time of a long rectangular unit with cylindrical cores along the spine. The notes beside it read, Test 14. Low yield success. Core stabilizes below 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Project cannot operate above ambient temperatures without system failure. Recommendation. Store in sealed, temperature-regulated environment. Note: do not bypass safety override. Prior incident unrecoverable. A chill passed through her that had nothing to do with the cold room. Beneath the binder, tucked between a stack of folded diagrams, she found a small black notebook with a broken elastic strap and a grease stain on the back. Inside, sketches. Dozens. Some done quickly in pencil, others in pen with annotations. One full-page drawing caught her eye, a smaller version of the Genesis engine, paired with handwritten notes. Miniaturized concept for autonomous use. Field deployment prototype, possible fit into Humvee chassis, and then, scribbled in red across the bottom, no, not for combat, not for them. She flipped further. The page is now more frantic. Notes about tests gone wrong. Conflicting orders from command. Even references to another location. Hangar 9, Davis Range, AZ. None of it made sense, but in the back of the notebook, almost hidden, was a photo. This one was personal. A young woman, maybe 6 or 7, sat in her grandfather's lap, holding a wrench bigger than her forearm, both of them grinning under the hood of a car. She knew the girl instantly. It was her. She turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, "She's the one. If they ever find this, I trust her. A.F." Riley sat down hard on the garage floor, the notebook in her lap. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just research. This was a message. A passing of something sacred. Her grandfather hadn't just hidden this tech. He'd left it for her. And suddenly, the name etched on the silver case, Ford R, made all the sense in the world. The sun was just beginning to burn through the mist when Riley pulled into her grandmother's driveway. The old Craftsman house hadn't changed in years. Same chipped white trim, same porch swing that squeaked in the wind, same flower beds fighting to survive another season. She hadn't called ahead. She didn't want to give herself the chance to back out. She stepped out of the truck, notebook and photo tucked under her arm. Her grandmother opened the door before Riley even knocked. A woman in her 80s now, but still sharp-eyed and straight-backed, wearing a knitted sweater and holding a steaming mug. "You're early," she said, voice low and even. "I figured something was wrong. I found something," Riley said quietly. "In a container I bought." Her grandmother's eyes shifted slightly. Not wide with surprise, but narrower, careful, measured. She stepped aside without another word and gestured her in. The house smelled like lemon polish and old paper. A clock ticked somewhere in the hall. Riley sat at the kitchen table and slid the notebook across to her. The photo, too. Her grandmother didn't touch them right away. She just looked. A long moment passed before she finally reached out and pulled the photo closer. Her fingers trembled. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. Riley's heart thudded. "What was it, Grandma?" Her grandmother looked up. The softness was gone now. In its place, something harder, grief, maybe, or memory. "That's your grandfather's handwriting. And that machine. I hoped it never surfaced." "You knew about it?" "I knew enough." She took a slow sip of her coffee. "Your grandfather was stationed at a research base near Alamogordo in the early 70s. They were working on something, experimental. Not a weapon, exactly. Not a vehicle either. Something in between. Something new. He didn't tell me much, but I knew it scared him." "Scared him how?" She looked up again, this time meeting Riley's eyes. "He was a pilot, brave. But when he came home after they shut that program down, he couldn't sleep. Kept the garage locked. Burned documents in the fireplace after you went to bed. He said he'd buried a piece of that project. Hid it from everyone, even his own unit." Riley felt her stomach twist. "Why?" Her grandmother answered without hesitation. "Because he didn't trust the people in charge. He said they didn't understand what they'd built, or maybe they did, and didn't care." There was a silence between them then, heavy and reverent. Riley slid the notebook back toward her and opened it to the blueprint sketch of the Genesis engine. "I found this," she said, "and something else. A box with his name. A machine I don't recognize. And," her voice lowered, "a warning." Her grandmother stood and walked to a drawer. From it, she pulled a small velvet box. Inside, a military pin, dulled by time. She placed it gently in Riley's hand. "He left that for you too," she said softly. "Said you'd need it when the past came knocking." And outside, in the distance, a black SUV turned onto their street. The SUV rolled past without stopping, but Riley saw the driver glance toward the house, sunglasses reflecting sunlight like a camera flash. It wasn't paranoia, it was precision. Whoever they were, they knew where to look. She watched from behind the curtain until the taillights disappeared. Then she exhaled, slow and shaky. Back at the garage that afternoon, she locked the bay doors for the first time in months. A steel chain wrapped around the handles. The Genesis unit sat beneath her floodlights, still as a sarcophagus, its chrome ribs glinting dully beneath a layer of dust. She approached it slowly, like it might wake, if startled. Riley laid the blueprints out beside it and matched every sketched panel, every conduit. The craftsmanship was years, maybe decades ahead of anything she'd seen in conventional engineering. There were magnetic stabilizers in place of engine mounts. A coolant reservoir sealed in tempered glass. The power source was unclear. There were no combustion chambers, no fuel lines, no intake manifolds. She unscrewed a side panel and found a black composite cylinder at its core, partially encased in a thermally shielded sleeve. The label read, "Core module do not expose to temperatures above 40 degrees Fahrenheit." Her breath caught. This was why the pod was sealed and insulated. The entire container was built as a mobile cold storage chamber, not to preserve a relic, but to contain a live system. Something still active, still dangerous. She turned back to the metal box with her name on it, Ford, R, and reached for her multimeter and soldering iron. It was time to crack it open. 20 minutes later, she had the panel off. Inside were nested compartments of memory cards, handwritten logs, and a small wrapped bundle, a dog tag with her grandfather's serial number, and a single word etched beneath: Genesis. There was also a hard drive. She plugged it into her laptop. Breath held. It booted slowly, older OS, late 90 seconds era, but it worked. A folder opened. For her. Inside were video logs. The first one blinked to life. Her grandfather sat at a workbench, sweat glistening on his brow, a fan whirring in the background. If you're watching this, Riley, it means you found the pod. I hoped it wouldn't come to this, but I knew it might. His voice cracked. Genesis was never supposed to be a weapon, but people higher up had other plans. We shut it down. Or tried. I sabotaged the final unit. That one. Right there in front of you. He leaned forward into the camera. You need to finish what I couldn't. Not build it their way, build it your way. They'll come looking, but they won't expect someone like you. That's your edge. The screen glitched and froze. Riley stared at her reflection in the laptop. Not just a mechanic anymore. She was the last person standing between a forgotten legacy and those still trying to control it. And the Genesis engine? It wasn't dead. It was waiting. The knock came just after midnight. 3 short raps, not loud, but confident, intentional. Riley had been sleeping on the cot in the corner of the garage, boots still on, her grandfather's hard drive clutched against her chest like a lifeline. She sat up instantly, heart thudding. Outside, the wind had died. No cicadas, no cars, just quiet. She moved slowly, avoiding the windows, and edged toward the front of the garage. Her hand hovered near the breaker panel. If she needed to, she could cut the lights in a second. Another knock. This time, just once. Through the glass of the office door, she saw a figure. Male, clean cut. Too clean for this part of town. Black jacket, no badge, no logo, just presence. Next to him, a second man stood near the shop's front gate, arms folded, scanning the street. Riley cracked the door just an inch. We're closed, the man smiled politely. We're not customers. Just need to ask you a few questions. She didn't open the door wider. About what? The man's eyes flicked to the side of the building, where the edge of the rusted storage pod was barely visible under a tarp. About a shipment. Something that went missing from a government depot in Nevada. Years ago. Her grip on the door tightened. Never been to Nevada, he chuckled, low and rehearsed. Didn't say you had. But the thing is, Miss Ford, we believe your late grandfather might have taken something. Something valuable. And it may have recently resurfaced. He knew her name. That was enough. I don't know what you're talking about, she said flatly, then closed the door and locked it. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Outside, the men didn't shout, didn't threaten. They simply walked back to the black SUV idling by the curb. Before getting in, the first man looked back once more. He raised 2 fingers to his temple in a mock salute. Then they were gone, swallowed by the dark. Riley didn't sleep after that. By dawn, she'd sealed the garage from the inside, welded an extra bar across the bay doors, moved the Genesis unit into the paint booth, and rigged a hidden pulley system to lower a camouflage tarp over it. Anyone walking in would see nothing more than a stripped-down Cadillac waiting for a primer coat. She plugged in the hard drive again and skipped ahead through the logs. One entry caught her breath. If they ever find you, her grandfather said, eyes serious, don't destroy the engine. Finish it, but do it right. We built it to help people, to provide power where there was none. Clean energy, no noise, no heat signature. That's why they wanted it. But that's not why I made it. Riley paused the video. A generator that couldn't be tracked. Silent, clean, self-sustaining. No wonder they were watching. No wonder. They waited. She stared down at the floor, where the Genesis unit rested, humming faintly under its tarp. She wasn't just restoring a machine. She was holding onto a threat, or maybe a revolution. and someone out there wanted it back before she could decide which. The letter was buried inside a false bottom of the metal box, tucked beneath a velvet panel that Riley hadn't noticed until the morning after the visit. She'd been pacing, wired from too much adrenaline and not enough sleep, trying to figure out her next move when she tapped the bottom of the box and felt it shift. She pried it up with a flathead screwdriver. Underneath, a small envelope sat folded with brittle edges, sealed with a faded red wax stamp. Her initials were written on the front, not typed, not printed, handwritten, in her grandfather's looping mechanical script. Just 3 letters. R. F. F. Riley Francis Ford. She held it for a long moment before she broke the seal. Inside was a single-page letter on heavy paper, inked in black, the stroke slightly smudged in places like he'd written it with trembling hands. The heading read, "To my granddaughter, when the time comes. If you're reading this, then what I feared most has happened. They didn't destroy Genesis. Or maybe I couldn't bring myself to do it. Either way, it's in your hands now. I've watched you grow, Riley. Watched the way you take to machines like they're breathing things. That gift, it's not just talent, it's trust. A mechanic learns to listen when others just tinker. That's what this project needs. Someone who listens." She stopped reading for a second, throat tight. Genesis was never supposed to be a weapon. That was the first lie they told us. We built it to bring light to places with none. Power without noise, energy without waste. But the silence, the invisibility, that made it valuable to the wrong people. Command wanted to install it in surveillance, drones, silent aircraft, even submarines. They called it undetectable power. I called it a mistake. When I walked away, I took the only prototype left, hid it, sealed it, because I knew the day would come when someone would either find it or come looking for it. And when they did, I didn't want it to be just anyone. I wanted it to be you. You'll have decisions to make. Big ones. You'll want to run. I know that instinct, I had it too. But you'll also feel a pull, like this machine is speaking to you. That's real. Machines have memory, Riley, and this one remembers every choice we made building it. If you decide to finish the Genesis engine, you can't do it like we did. You have to do it better. Safer. Kinder, don't follow my blueprint. Write your own. And if the men in black suits come back, look them in the eye. You've got my fire in you. I see it every time you hold a wrench. I'm sorry I left this burden to you. But I'm also proud more than you'll ever know. Finish it. Not for them, not even for me, but for what it could be. Arthur J. Ford. Riley set the letter down on the workbench. For the first time, the weight of the Genesis engine didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a challenge, and maybe even a calling. The first thing Riley did was clear the garage. Every car, every loose bolt, every half-finished job was put on pause. Clients called. She let it ring. Friends texted. She didn't answer. For the first time since inheriting the shop, she didn't care about the calendar or the invoices. This was bigger. She rolled the Genesis unit onto the central lift and removed the tarp. The machine looked like a cross between a power generator and a jet engine, but with smoother curves and fewer visible seams. It wasn't designed to be repaired. It was designed to endure. Still, it had aged. The coolant lines were crystallized. The core stabilizer blinked weakly, its temperature barely holding. She jotted a dozen notes in her grandfather's old journal. It would be her notebook now. She created a checklist at the top of the first page. Restore the coolant seals. Diagnose magnetic field stabilizers. Reinforce housing panel. Rewire primary interface. Find alternative power initiator. That last one was the hardest. Whatever energy source the Genesis used, it wasn't on any blueprint she recognized. But she had the logs, the memory drives, and time, though she wasn't sure how much. She worked in silence, 12-hour stretches without music, with only the hum of her soldering iron, the hiss of acetylene, and the soft creak of the garage settling in the heat. At night, she slept on the floor beside the unit, blanket rolled under her neck, the machine's dull pulse like a lullaby. By the fourth day, she had the outer shell stripped and cleaned. The generator's belly revealed its secret: a plasma, core suspension system, unlike anything in commercial tech. The casing was marked with an unfamiliar alloy code TQX9, which didn't show up in any database she checked. Probably military issue, black project level. When she powered on the diagnostics for the first time, the Genesis responded with a gentle vibration, alive, but cautious, like it recognized her. She smiled and whispered, "Yeah, I'm here too." On the fifth night, Riley's childhood friend, Kara, showed up at the garage. She hadn't told anyone, but word in small towns moved faster than engines on an open highway. "What are you building?" Kara asked, arms crossed but voice soft. Riley hesitated, then opened the side panel to show her the glowing stabilizer core. Kara took a step back. "Is that safe?" "No," Riley said. "But it could be, if I finish it the right way." Kara looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you need?" Riley blinked. "Wait, you're in?" Kara smirked. "You rebuilt my Civic from a pile of junk. I figure I owe you at least one secret government project." By the end of the week, a small crew had formed. Not trained engineers, just loyal hands, a mechanic, a welder, a coder from the next county over. People who believed in Riley, even if they didn't understand Genesis. She stood before the machine, sleeves rolled, grease on her cheek, heart pounding. The rebuild had begun, not to finish someone else's dream, but to make it hers. The final bolt clicked into place, just after sunset. For a moment, no one moved. The garage was quiet except for the whirring of Riley's laptop fans and the occasional creak of cooling metal. The Genesis engine stood tall at the center of the floor, humming with restrained energy. Its pulse was steady now. No more flickers, no more red alerts. Every system Riley and her team had touched was now responding. It was stable, alive. Outside, the sky had turned that strange shade of lavender blue only Carolina knew how to make. Riley wiped her hands on a shop towel, turned toward the team: Kara, Evan, Luis, Mrs. Bramley from the high school robotics club, even old man Jenkins, who'd brought them a bucket of fried chicken each night, and she nodded once. "That's it," she said softly. "We did it." Luis exhaled and leaned back against the wall, eyes wide. "You sure it's not going to explode?" Riley cracked a grin. 95% sure. Comforting. Kara muttered. They all laughed. That raw, nervous laughter that only shows up after pushing past the point of no return. Riley stepped forward and connected the final interface cable to the laptop. The Genesis screen blinked. Systems operational. Ready for initialization. She hesitated, then pulled the dog tag from her jacket pocket and held it for a long beat. The same one her grandfather had left behind, engraved with Genesis. She clipped it to the startup keychain and slotted it into the control port. The engine didn't roar to life. It whispered. A soft, deep hum began, resonating through the floor, like the low chord of a cello echoing across steel. Lights flickered not from failure, but from draw. The power was real. Steady, cold, and clean. The garage lights dimmed, then stabilized. The Genesis wasn't consuming power. It was producing it. "Jesus," Kara breathed, watching the voltage meter rise. "It's silent." "Not just silent," Riley whispered. "It's invisible. No emissions, no heat signature, no trace." The dream was real. The door behind them creaked. They all turned. An old man stood in the threshold. Worn coat, silver beard, eyes soft and rimmed with red. "Riley Ford?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yeah?" "I served with your grandfather," he said, "back when Genesis was just sketches on a napkin. I've been waiting a long time for someone to finish what we started." He stepped forward, awe on his face. "And from what I'm seeing, you did more than finish it." Riley swallowed hard. I didn't do it alone. No one ever does, he said. But you made the right choice. You made it yours. That was always the point. A long silence passed as the machine hummed between them. Not like a weapon, not like a threat, but like a promise. Outside, the wind picked up. A distant engine growled. The world was still watching. Riley knew that. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She turned to her crew. Let's put it to use. They smiled. And just like that, a hidden engine meant for war became a beacon, a legacy reborn, not in steel or silence, but in purpose.